It is time for another episode of this podcast known as Model Railroad Talk. I'm your host, Gary. I haven't said that in a long time. So, in this episode, we are going to be discussing structures, kind of going back to elementary stuff a little bit and building and kind of the stuff I use and techniques and stuff like that. Or not really techniques, but some of the things I use and my thoughts on it. And that was all from one of our longtime listeners and supporters, Stephen L. Thank you, Stephen, for that. So, without further ado, let's get the show on the tracks. Welcome to episode 108. We just keep climbing up in episode numbers and it's awesome. So, as we said in the intro, today's episode, we are going to be talking about structures, building kits, whatever you want to call them. And this came in from a longtime listener and supporter of the podcast, Stephen L. I want to thank him for sending in the email, the idea. Him and I have been in email contacts ever since the beginning, basically. And so basically what his idea is, how about doing a discussion on building kits? Basically said seems elementary. However, the use of enamel based paints versus acrylics, chalks for the finishes. What about details, window types of glass, pitfalls, tools, stuff like that. So, I figured we would use that. Go back to the basics. Go back to the early days of our podcast when we've touched on these different subjects. I think at different times, but never. I don't think really a full out thorough discussion. And for the record, this episode, first one in a long time, I am doing it solo and I am fine with that. Not that I don't enjoy guests. I enjoy having guests on. I just didn't have any lined up for this episode. So, and I figure, having guests on is great, but also, kind of go back to what this podcast was originally founded on is just a typical guy, your average model railroader, nobody special, doing it the average guy way. So moving in, we're just going to kind of do a quick recap of the different, I guess, the most commonly types of kits. Okay. You have your traditional wood kits, or sometimes they're called craftsman structure kits. You have places like Bar Mills, they make those. Mud Creek Models. Back in the day, there was Fine Scale Miniatures, which you can still find some out there, but I do not believe he's producing. I think it's been a while since he's been producing them. And then you have your typical plastic kits from like Walthers. Well, DPM is Walthers now. And then you have a lot of people, when they scratch build, they use styrene. And my Casey's I talk about, it is actually a combination of acrylic. Acrylic plastic, I guess is the best way to put it, and styrene. And then even more so with being more advanced, you have 3D printed structures. Okay. Um, and with the 3D printed, you have those that use filament and those that use resin. I personally have two actually resin printers. I would like to get a filament printer someday just so I can print things, some structures. Let's put it this way. Some of the structures I want to print, the resin, you are limited in size unless you want to, like the brand I use, Elegoo. I mean, they do have a bigger uh resin printer, but it's also like $700, and I don't really gain a whole lot of extra room to be able to build. I do, but not for that price. Whereas I could go to a filament printer um for a few $100s less and be able to almost print double, if not a little more than double the size that I want. And for me, the reason for that is I can there are some structures that I want to print. I have them slated to print, but I have to go through and instead of printing them in one, I have to take them into another program, break them apart wall by wall, and then print them wall by wall and put them together. So anyways, let's move on. Let's start with the basics. So wood kits, generally speaking, you're going to want to use like a wood glue. I know I have used, and I've said this before in early episodes, canopy glue. I can't think of the name, Formula 560, I think it is, canopy glue, and that stuff works awesome. It's got some flexibility to it. So the nice thing about the wood kits or the canopy glue for the wood kits is as that wood breathes, if you will, as moisture, from humidity or whatever goes up and down and it moves, it stresses. The canopy glue will actually flex a little bit. So it's some good stuff. It is a little bit more expensive per ounce or whatever you want to call it, but it also does have dual purpose. You instead of using, and we're kind of moving, we're jumping around here, but you can use it. I'll get back on track with this, but you can use it for windows as well. So we'll touch on that after a bit. But yeah, canopy glue for formula without looking at it, it's like Formula 560 canopy glue by I can't think of the company name. I want to say it starts with a Z. Anyways, in comparison to wood glue, I personally use kind of a combination of them. It depends on what I'm doing. I know the wood glue tends to be a stronger bond if once it's cured. So I like to use the wood glue for my supports. And with wood kits, the wood kit manufacturers, generally speaking, they give you extra and the sizes are different. It depends on, excuse me, it depends on what scale you're modeling and this and that, but generally like 1/8 inch by 1/8 inch square wood, that kind of thing, strips. But basically, you want to support the backs, your walls. You want to put supports on the backs and clamp them down when you glue them. Make sure they're straight. So it keeps them from bowing and all that stuff. And that's where I like to use the wood glue because it tends to be a stronger bond for that. And where the canopy glue comes in is when I'm attaching my walls to each other, whether it be end to end or at a 90-degree. That's where I like the canopy glue because of the flex. Then you don't have to worry about the edges. There's less chance of a wall edge cracking and and coming apart because of that flexibility. Um, a lot of most wood manufacturers use basswood. Some people will scratch build with balsa wood. I personally am not a fan of balsa wood because balsa wood is not as dense as basswood. It's a little more porous. So not only does it, yeah, it absorbs glue, but it absorbs it way quicker or the moisture out of the glue quicker than basswood. So it doesn't get a good bond. Paint, there again, it being that it's more porous, the paint soaks in way quicker, and it seems like for the little bit eh, for the little bit less you're saving with balsa wood compared to basswood, um, it's not worth it because you're making up the difference in the cost by okay, well now I've got to put an extra layer of primer, an extra layer of paint, or maybe before you even get to that point, you got to get some wood filler and fill it in to smooth the spot out. Choose wisely. Balsa does have its place. It's very light. It's a little bit lighter of a wood than basswood, but most wood kits are from manufacturers are basswood. Then, of course, you have your plastic kits. One last thing on wood kits, if you're new to the hobby, I do not recommend using like regular white glue to glue them together, like Elmer's glue all or whatever they call it nowadays. Reason being, and I do recommend it for doing white glue for doing like ballast and stuff like that. But reason being is White glue, it once it's cured, if you will, it still can be affected by moisture by humidity and stuff, and then your bonds start coming apart. Whereas wood glue and the canopy glue, once it's cured, it is virtually impenetrable by moisture. It takes almost like a chemical to get it off, or sanding. Now, plastic kits, a lot of people use the old airplane glue. You can use that. I'm not a fan of that myself. People will use super glue, whether liquid or gel. I, well, we'll move on. And then there's other companies like Bonding, which it's actually they call it's like a plastic weld. I personally have found that, and I use it's you can go to your paint store and buy a quart of, it's called MEK. I think mine's an organic MEK. You don't need to buy expensive stuff, right? A quart costs, I think when I bought that 2.5 years ago, that quart cost me 11 or $12. And I just recently, I have like a little, I don't know, it's like a 2-ounce bottle. Maybe, no, it's bigger than that. It's probably 4-ounce bottle, glass bottle that I keep it in with a cap. I dump it in there. I just recently filled that up. And so basically 2 years, that little tiny bottle. And can't even tell you how much more I have. I have at least over 3/4 of that quart left. So MEK, I use that as my plastic weld. If you're gonna be using a lot of it, like, if you're, let's say you're building a massive structure, and you're putting in a lot of, little window details or something, and you're using that, I would make sure you're in a well-ventilated area, and that would go for, like, the bonding and super glue as well. Make sure you've got vent or at least air movement, because some people can be affected by that. But I use the super glue, whether it be liquid or the gel type, depending on what I'm doing. If it's something to where, let's say I'm putting a part on and I need it to kind of hold in place a little, like the fit isn't quite super tight, I will use a liquid, or I'm sorry, a gel, because the gel tends to hold it in place. If it's got a super tight place or super tight fit, I will use the liquid super glue. But if that's only if it's like, let's say I'm putting on brass or something like that to a plastic kit, I'll use the super glue. However, if I'm doing plastic to plastic, I will use my MEK. And that kind of goes in the same thing for styrene. Styrene is yes, it's a form of plastic, but styrene tends to be a little more flexible, generally speaking, and a little more durable than like the injection molded plastic, like Walthers and what they do. It's obviously a different kind of plastic, but styrene, the same thing. And you will find with styrene, if you are using any kind of plastic weld, whether it be the bonding or whatever they call it now, or MEK, it will set up a little quicker and you'll notice it'll start melting it a little bit quicker than like your typical injection molded plastic kits. Um, there again, styrene, the same thing with, well, the styrene, the plastic kits, using super glue versus a plastic weld. I prefer the plastic weld because it's just as you think. It melts the plastic enough that they actually bonds to each other. Yeah, it's a little better bond. Whereas super glue, as time goes on, well, when it dries, it's almost brittle. Well, as time goes on, it does get brittle and it can break. Super glue does have its place. Trust me, this layout's got there's several models that have lots of it on there, but so keep that in the back of your mind. If it's a joint or a part that, let's say you put super glue on, or you put the part on with super glue and it just keeps falling off or not wanting to stay or whatever, try go get yourself some MEK from your local hobby, or not hobby shop, hardware store, and try that. And all I use for that is just a little paintbrush and put it on. It doesn't take a lot. So the next type of kit, which my Casey's kit is made from, this, a majority of it is acrylic plastic. And if, like, I've got some acrylic signs that a guy on TikTok, I got I reached out to, he was making, or he makes acrylic signs, HO scale showcase. And acrylic is while it's a little bit more brittle of a plastic, it is a little more structurally sound. You don't have to worry about warping as bad with it. But gluing it together, I found with my Casey's kit, it is a little bit more of a process. I originally started, well, let's just say this. Originally, or to start out, a plastic weld will not work with acrylic. Okay. Um, Putting the building together. Okay. I tried it and I held it, had it in my little corner clamps and everything I let it sit overnight, and I pulled my corner clamps off, and it was like there was nothing there. Okay. So my next thing was, let's try super glue. So same thing the next night, glued two corners together, put my corner things on, let it sit overnight. Next day came down. Okay, great. Took them off. I went to go move it, and the super glue was, brittle, dry like it's supposed to be. And it barely held. So what I found actually with acrylic is, I'm like, something's got to give here. What I ended up doing for the acrylic portions of my Casey's building, which, like I said, a bulk of it, or a bulk of a bulk of the kit is acrylic, which would be the walls and, basically the outside portion that you're going to be painting and all that, was using PVC glue, for like PVC pipe. I went and got some of that, I had some. It was out in the garage. That's what I mean when I went and got it. I had a little deal of it, and I'm like, well, I put some of that on there and did the same thing, and sure enough, it seemed to work. You still have to be careful with your corners. I ended up going back after I got my 4 walls done and everything, and taking some of the PVC glue and running a thick, if you've never messed with it, it's like almost like like a gel. But I put some tape on the top and bottom, and I ran like a little bit, for lack of a better term, thicker bead down the middle, and then I let that sit overnight for each corner, and it seemed to help and hold pretty good. And so far, with me working on, if you watch some of the videos on YouTube, where I've been adding parts and stuff like that, lighting and whatnot, it seems to be holding up really well. So, um, if your kit you get, and that is a Summit Customs kit, and I think a lot of theirs is acrylic, and I'm not cutting it down. I mean, it's an awesome kit, and they have several other kits I'd like to get. I just don't know where I'd put them, but that's down the road. But if you get a kit and it's acrylic, and you'll know because the pieces will be super smooth, super shiny and glossy. And I even tried roughing up the edges a little bit where the glue is going to hold, and that still didn't work for anything but the PVC glue. Now we're going to move on to 3D printed buildings. As far as 3D printing, I can only really talk to the resin side. I would assume the filament side, because they are two different processes. I would assume the filament side is going to be similar as far as what I talk about, but I can tell you for the resin side, as far as gluing, for mine, I just use super glue. Depending on what I'm doing, most of the time I'm using a gel super glue for when I put my pieces on after I 3D print them. The liquid works, but it's almost like I guess the way I feel. So, and this is for any 3D printed part, if you're gluing them together or do something else, you almost need the gel to give it time to really soak in and bite in. Whereas the liquid, it's like it cures too fast. So it just kind of sits on the top layer of whatever the 3D printed piece is. Whereas the gel, it takes a little bit longer for it to dry, and it allows it to kind of bite in a little better. So that's kind of what I've experienced. If I'd love to hear from you if you found maybe another way for the 3D printing. Is like I said, mine's resin. I have even taken resin and put it, in a actual resin I use to print it with, and use a brush to put it on in a UV light. While I like that, it's a long process. So if that's your only option, you're, it is what it is. But as far as if, let's say, you purchased a building and it came as a kit form, or maybe the windows you have to put in and stuff like that, I recommend using gel super glue. Use For the gel super glue, I've personally like the Gorilla Glue brand for the gel anyways. As far as the liquid, I buy whatever's cheap. They're all basically made the same, and um and let's face it, the liquid stuff seems to dry up so quick. There's no point in spending buku bucks on it. I think I went on Amazon this last time and got like 48 of those little tubes for like, I don't know, it was like $10 or something, or less. So um but um but yeah, I that's what I use for the 3D printing, at least resin, to glue my parts and stuff. So, now that's kind of how I build it. That's what I use. Now we're going to move on to paint. For starters, all of these different styles of kits: wood, plastic, styrene, acrylic, resin printing. With the exception of, like, the 3D filament printing, if you have they make, like, 4, 6 color. I think there's actually a company that makes an 8 color 3D printer for filament, to where you can potentially, if the colors are right, the filament colors are right, you can print your building in color. But let's face it, most of the time, even if the colors are right, we're gonna change them. We wanna add accents. We wanna make it our own because it's our own model, right? Our own railroad. So that's why the printing in color, I personally, if somebody's advertised, "Oh, this building's got 5 colors and blah, blah, blah," I would be, unless you're planning on buying it, plopping it down on your railroad and being good with it, which is, that's your choice, and it's your railroad. I wouldn't spend extra money if it costs extra to get it printed in colors, because let's face it, I know that uh, when I build my structure kits, like I'm building a plastic kit that I got from Scott over at Scott's Trains. It's a hobby shop and it's a Walther's kit. And I'm actually building, I've got the main building done and I haven't done any priming or anything yet, but I eventually will go and prime it and paint it and that kind of thing. So, um, while one could build it using the plastic color that they put in there, and it looked fine, most of us in this hobby like to, personalize it, right? So, for starters, you're going to want when I say this, I'm not saying going out and buy the most expensive can of primer, but I prefer using rattle can, or if you want to airbrush, if you're into airbrushing, you can airbrush a primer on there. I Depending on what it is you're priming, okay? Would I use a spray can, a rattle can to prime like the locomotive I'm working on? No, because it's too the particles, the paint, what do they call it? The paint particles are too thick. They're not ground down as fine as regular model paint. But for buildings, generally speaking, as long as you prime it properly, I usually, most of the time, my priming, I do between 2 and 4 coats of with the primer, thin coats, to make sure I hit different angles. And that's after, I'll do 1 coat, let it dry, do another coat. And generally speaking, the primer I use, which is I think it's Rust-Oleum. It's not their all-in-one stuff because that's pretty thick. It's basically just the cheap old primer. Better yet, if you can find an automotive primer, a cheapo automotive primer, and it has the fine mist spray, that's even better. I used to use that. It just seems like it's harder to find those, but you want to get a good primer on the building. It doesn't matter if it's wood, uh, 3D printed, acrylic, plastic, whatever. Get a good bond, good base coat, and having said that, make sure that if you've handled it a lot, like they say, wash it down and water with a little bit of dishwashing detergent and let it air dry, and use rubber gloves when you're handling it until you get to that primer. And even after you get the primer on there, you still want to handle it with care as far as, wearing rubber gloves, because the oil that's in our hands, this natural oil from our bodies, you may not see it, but when you go to put that finish coat on there, like, okay, this has got the details I want. I'm at the painting stage, and you go to prime it, you may have one spot that the paint doesn't look right, or won't bite right because of the oil on our hands. So that's another thing. Make sure prep work. The more you spend on prep work and on your structures, the end result will be better. So the biggest thing though is good primer. As far as an oil versus acrylic base primer, I would try to stay away from a heavy solvent based primer, especially with anything plastic, because while yes, it's going to bite into it, but it still could start eating it while it's curing. That's why I like the rattle can stuff. Even if it is a solvent based primer, most of the time when you're spraying it, it's designed to dry quickly is the thing, to where it's not sitting there and etching itself in. So that's one thing I would definitely stay away from, is any heavy oil solvent based primer. But and now as far as paints go, once you get that good base primer on there, I would tend to stick with a compatible top coat of paint. So a lot of the aerosol cans nowadays you can get, it's in what I call a hybrid acrylic paint, or even it being an salt, or whatever they call it, chemical based paint primer. Make sure it's cured. Most of the rattle can stuff, you can go to like Home Depot or Menards or wherever your hardware store is. Most of those, once they are cured, you can top coat them with really any kind of paint. I've got stuff that I use. I uh, primed it with the rattle can, and then I came back in and I used my apple barrel acrylic paints and painted it, and everything is fine. Now, here's the catch: is if you're going to do something like that, I would highly recommend giving it a couple days between the priming process of it being, from the time you primed it till you actually start painting it. Allow that primer to vent off any of its gases or anything that may be remaining. We don't realize it, but even when you touch that primer and oh yeah, it's definitely dry, it's not tacky, it's ready for paint, there still could be some gases releasing on there. Okay, so I generally give my buildings, or whatever it is I'm painting, a couple days after they're primed before I start putting my top coat paint on there. Just something to think about, as far as, the last thing you want to do is do all that and spend all this time, and whether you're airbrush, hand paint, whatever, rattle can, and you put that top coat on and it starts bubbling or doesn't look right. So, yeah, that is my take on the paint. We are going to take a break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about kind of like chalks and stuff like that for and what kind of finish to use and details, and yeah. So, like we always say, stick around because we'll be back shortly.
And scale modelers, are you ready for a steam locomotive that's sure to turn heads? Broadway Limited Imports is bringing you the newly tooled Santa Fe 3751 Northern, and it's packed with incredible detail. With Paragon 4 sound, DC, and DCC, these beauties feature real sounds recorded from the actual 3751. And yes, they even include working smoke, a must-have feature that's rare in N-Scale. Arriving in early 2026, but don't wait. Secure yours today by ordering from your favorite dealer.
Calling all model railroaders and railroad enthusiasts. The Hawkeye Model Railroad Club and ScaleSigns.com are proud to sponsor the 5th annual Iowa City Train Show on Sunday, October 19th at the Johnson County Fairgrounds in Iowa City, Iowa, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Enjoy 2 buildings packed full of model railroad items in scales HO, NO, and more, along with railroad memorabilia of all shapes and sizes. Admission is just $5 for adults, with kids 12 and under free. Don't forget to also check out the Hawkeye Model Railroad Club's layout progress down at their club building, open to the public for free all day long. Interested in being a vendor or displaying your organization or model railroad layout? Check out our website at www.hawkeyemodelrr.com/2025 train show. The fifth annual Iowa City Train Show, sponsored by ScaleSigns.com and the Hawkeye Model Railroad Club on Sunday, October 19th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Johnson County Fairgrounds in Iowa City, Iowa. We'll see you at the show.
Are you interested in operations? Are you new to operations? Are you a seasoned operator? Consider joining the Operations Special Interest Group, or OPSIG. The OPSIG is an organization dedicated to operations from the experienced operator to the novice. Their principal purpose is to discuss, develop, and disseminate ways of operating model railroads to realistically emulate practices of the prototype. This includes sharing information on various methods of generating, moving, and controlling traffic to heighten the feeling that our models are an active and integral part of the national rail transportation network, serving shippers and consignees throughout the nation. Their membership is a tremendous resource to exchange information and ideas and to develop improved ways for hobbyists to learn the art and science of operating a railroad in a particular model railroad. Their quarterly publication, The Dispatcher's Office, is another great resource. It's loaded with articles about operations, including paperwork, planning, execution, and hosting of sessions. Annual membership is only $10 per year. Membership includes 4 issues of the Dispatcher's Office e-version, access to their Dispatcher's Office archives, an industry database to help add realism to your operations, and a directory of operating layouts across the country. If you like to operate or are just becoming aware of this exciting and growing part of the hobby, this is the place. All are welcome. You can find them at www.opsig.org. That's www.opsig. We are back from break, and I am glad to be back with you guys. So, to keep on with our discussion about structure, building kits, whatever, the first half we kind of talked about the different kinds of kits and putting them together with what kind of glue, adhesive, that kind of thing, and paint. As far as weathering those kits, you have to take into consideration what the kit is made from, okay? So, as an example, my wood structure kits, after I get them supported, the wall supported, glued together, before I mess with the roof or anything, I will actually go over. It depends on what effect I'm looking for, okay? If I'm going to be doing like a painted building that's not really going to be heavily weathered, like it's not like an old abandoned building, if you will, then I'll prime it, I'll paint it, I'll do my weathering effect, and there's several different ways to do a peeling paint effect on there on the internet. A lot of the techniques I use are actually from Scott Mason. I've got his videos, and from the 90s, he had a podcast and all that stuff, and I found a lot of his techniques that I believe some of them he got from George Celios. They work great. But if I'm wanting to do like a fully abandoned building, like it's in a desperate need of coat of paint, but you're afraid to put paint on it because it might fall down kind of building, then what I'll do is I'll use the typical mixture of Indie ink and alcohol. I've got a light mixture and a heavy mixture, and I'll use that. I'll put that on before I do any paint. And as a base, and then I'll do paint over it. Whereas if it's going to be a newer building, I'll prime it, and then I'll do my different peeling paint effects and all that stuff. So, side note on if you're new to the hobby and you're like, what's indie ink and alcohol? It's basically like a black wash in a sense. The indie ink just helps transfer it, the alcohol thins down the indie ink, and it's like a transfer solution, if you will, because the alcohol will evaporate and then it'll leave like a nice grade, especially on wood. It leaves a nice aged wood effect. When I say I have a light and a dark mixture. Before anybody jumps on the email, start asking me what my mixture is, I will tell you right first thing, it all depends. My mixture may not work for you. There's different concentrates of India ink. I use the cheapo stuff because let's face it, I'm not using it for what its intended purpose is. And to be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure what its intended purpose is, but I think for writing, but but I use the cheapo stuff. So it takes me, in order for me to get my mixtures right, it takes more of the India ink I buy. Whereas if you buy a more expensive India ink, it's going to take less. So it just depends on the concentration. I do, in fact, use, some say use 70% rubbing alcohol. I don't like to because the 70% has more water with it. I prefer the 91% just because there's less water, and when you do put it on stuff, it'll evaporate a little quicker, and you have less chance, especially on anything wood. Uh, there's less chance of it, I guess, less of it soaking in and potentially distorting stuff. But once it's finished, there's all sorts of ways you can weather buildings. There's not, and I'll tell you, I don't have just one way that I use, one uh, weathering technique that I use. I look at the building basically, and it's the same with rail cars or anything like that. I look at it. What effect do I want? How can I achieve it? Um, and that some of that's determined before I start building the kit. Some of it is determined after I start building the kit. Some of it has to do with, well, what is the kit made from? Like we said, with the wood kits, you have to be careful with the really liquidy kind of techniques as it can distort. So those I would tend to stick with, maybe like as far as weathering, even if you have, let's say you're modeling maybe a freshly built or freshly painted structure, you still have to be careful with warpage on that, right? So, whereas plastic, 3D printing, stuff like that, it's not going to be affected by, it may be affected by heat or cold, but not in a sense, moisture. So, I tend to use a variety of like chalks, and I like like I went on Amazon, I bought, and there's so many different ones on there. You just have to find what you like. I bought a kit that I think it has like, I don't know, 48 sticks of chalk in there. There's different, like it's basically the rainbow of colors. And basically what I do is I'll pull out the colors I want to use for whatever I'm weathering, and I'll use my hobby knife, scrape them off onto a little piece of paper. I'll use a brush and put them on, and that kind of thing. And if it's a structure, generally speaking, I do not dull coat those like I would a rail car that, derailments happen. Let's face it, rail cars and locomotives, you do have to touch at different times. Structures, generally, we're not doing that unless you are doing, like, say, a module layout. Let's say you're doing like a free mo layout or something to where, okay, you're pulling your structures off to transport it. In that case, yes, I would probably clear coat, dull coat, to make sure chalk and your weathering doesn't get affected. Generally speaking, as far as the finishes on the buildings, I try to keep them as flat or matte as possible. Th- The reason being for that is basically it all depends, and I say this, it all depends, and this is my opinion. It all depends on what kind of lighting you're using. If you're using, like, say, track lighting from, like, say, the aisle with light going in, and even though it's an even light, track lighting puts off different lighting than, say, like the lighting I'm using, which is LED lighting. And while I can change the temperature of my lighting, but it's underneath my upper level to light the lower level, and then I have supports above my upper level to light, to hold the lights and other things, uh, to light it. So mine gets an overall light different than somebody who has track lighting in a sense. So, and incandescent lighting, even if it's a track light and you're putting LED bulbs in there, colored temperatured LED bulbs, it's still a different source. It's a different beam of light, I guess is the best way to put it. So I tend to make sure my buildings and structures, whatever you want to call them, have a matte finish because I don't really want shininess coming off them. Look in the real life. Buildings don't have shininess coming off them other than maybe like, well, other than like the windows or maybe signs, that kind of thing. Outside of that, I'm in the beliefs of everything should be flat on a railroad because the shininess to me takes away from it. Um, Unless it's a brand new locomotive and you're modeling, something like that that's shiny, okay, that's one thing, but buildings, which is what the subject of this podcast is, generally speaking, even brand new building isn't shiny. I don't care if it's wood, concrete, whatever it's made of, siding. It's even vinyl siding that they put on houses and structures and brand new tin siding or whatever they use, steel siding. It's not shiny. It may be smooth to the touch, and if the light hits it right, you might get a little reflection, but generally speaking, it is a very dull semi-gloss or matte finish in real life. So, if you are really going for that real effect, make sure you have a can or whatever your source for your clear coat is, dull coat, tester's dull coat, whatever. Make sure you have some of that. And keep your buildings flat. And my personal opinion, I think it looks better. It's one of those things like track. We put track down to run the trains on. It's an integral part of our railroad, model railroads, but yet we paint them to look real to hide them because we want the locomotive and cars and the scenery to stand out. Well, that's part of the scenery. Well, that's kind of the same with the buildings. While the buildings are more prominent, we don't want them so prominent that when somebody comes to look at our railroad, that stands out and it takes away from all the other details. So if you kind of set that standard for your railroad, even with your structures of, okay, I want everything matte. I don't want anything shiny or glossy, except for maybe the railheads or something like that. It'll help everything kind of blend together. And where you put in that super detail, not everybody's going to see it, but some people might. And it's all about the overall picture, I guess is the thing. So, that's kinda what I go through as far as the weathering and what I use for weathering. As far as details, depending on the building and if it's going to be a foreground building, a background building, or like a key scene. As an example, my Casey's, it's a kind of a key scene, so I'm putting extra detail into it. I've got my beam and rod and reel. That's when you walk down the basement, that in a sense is going to be the first bit of railroad, scenic railroad, more than track that you're going to see. So I want to make sure the details are there and it looks good. Now, I'm not super detailing them, but on the flip side, I'm not doing bare minimum. Like the building for the beam and rod and reel, right when you walk down, the structure's weathered. It's got some peeling paint effect. It's got some, and it's a wood, it's a Mud Creek Models building, and I've got it to where even like little siding pieces are coming loose and stuff like that. And I put in most people aren't going to pay attention to this, but I put in nail holes and different spots where the siding was butted up to each other, and canopy glue, which we talked about at the beginning, and I said I'd get back to. Instead of using the regular plastic windows that comes with the kit, the plastic they give you for the windows, I used canopy glue, which is awesome for that. Yeah, it goes on white, but once it dries, it's clear. It looks more like window glazing, like an older building, like they used to do it. I found some gooseneck lights that look really good. I thought it looked good on that building, and I put those by the doors and lit them up. And when it's on, while it's not super bright and it's just that little bit of detail, but it's enough that it really makes it stand out. My Casey's, I'm fortunate enough that I have one that has the same store style, I guess, color scheme, whatever you want to call it. I pass it every day to going to and from work. It's kind of the little bit older style building, so I'm trying to, within reason, somewhat model that and use that as what I'm basing stuff off of, because that's a key scene. Now, If it's just gonna be a background building, a fill-in, okay, yeah, I'm gonna paint the structure. I'm gonna maybe put some lights in it or on it, give it a little bit of an effect. As an example, I'm gonna do a little welding shop just in a background. It's not gonna be rail served or anything like that. And I actually have a welding deal that we got from I'm drawing a blank now. Um, Evan Designs. And I'm gonna put that in there to where when the power's on, it's looking like somebody's welding inside the building, you know? But it's not I'm not gonna go super detail on that building because it's more of a support structure and not a foreground structure. It's just to make the scene. So you have to, as far as the details go, unless you're a person that's your whole purpose of building a model railroad is so you can do super detail, that's fine. I'm not cutting you down. I wish I had the time to, and I'm realizing that right now that I've got lots and lots of projects going that I want to do a whole bunch of details when as much detail as I can for each project. But I've come to the conclusion that, okay, I've got to put some of these projects away because I don't have the time. You can only glue so much on, and then you got to let it, it cure or sit for overnight or whatever. And then before you know it, you have several projects laid out and take a chance of losing parts and stuff like that. Um, so it's one of those things where there's nothing wrong with building a structure, painting it up, maybe weathering it a little bit, setting it on your railroad, and then down the road, go back and add lights if you choose, or more details and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be done all the way, or right up front. It can always be added down the road. As far as tools that he asked, um, I outside of your typical hobby knife, toothpicks, glues. I use a Ponce wheel. If you don't know what that is, it's PONCE wheel. What do they call it? People that make fabric or make clothes, they use that a lot of times where or drafters or whatever will, and basically they'll set the plan down and it's got a whole bunch of little spikes on it and they go around the outline. And back in the day, they put a little bit of powder, white powder or something on it, lift it up, and it showed where they either needed to cut or stitch. I have a Ponce wheel, and when I bought it a long 20 some years ago. It came in like a 2 or 3 pack, and they had 2 or 3 different sizes, and I couldn't tell you what the size is, but the one that I use, it's as close as I'm gonna get for being able to do nail holes in wood siding, wood structures, if that structure would have it. What else do I use? I found on Amazon they're basically Q-tips, but the ends are they're pointed. It's like a cone, and they're a lot you don't wanna use them for your ears, trust me. But the cotton on the ends, I don't know exactly how they do it or whatever, but it's a lot, stiffer of an end than your typical, the cotton is stiffer. I'll use that a lot of times if I need to for weathering or painting or even like removing, like I've used that to remove decals and stuff like that off of cars or whatever. That those are good for weathering and using with chalks and stuff like that. I really, other than using, like I've got the Northwest Shortline chopper for cutting wood for my wood structures. I do have um, oh, what do they call it? One of those crosscut saws, basically, where you hobby saw, fine tooth one with the little miter jig, so you can cut angles and stuff. Which I don't use that often because I got the chopper, but it does have its place. Some people use it for cut and rail. I don't like using that. I That's where my Dremel comes in. Speaking of Dremel, Amazon or Temu, wherever you go, I would recommend getting yourself a set of die grinder bits, the kit I have has like 6 or 8 different ones. I use them at work, not the Dremel. I use a heavier duty ones at work, but they're great for. I use them on metal, cleaning out holes, or if I have to bore out a hole or whatever for fabrication. But the hobby ones, they're great if, you need to, especially on plastic kits and stuff like that. Maybe you're customizing and you need to cut out a window a little bigger. You can use these little kit bits. They have different bits, round head, like a cone head, one that's like a cone, stuff like that. They're great to have if you have a Dremel. I recommend having a set of those. Boy, I straight edge hobby, other than having a straight edge, a metal hobby straight, or a metal straight edge, and a metal hobby ruler, scale ruler. I recommend. They do make plastic ones. If plastic's all you have and you can't find, or you found one and you're waiting for a metal one to come in, they'll work. But the plastic ones, you have to be careful. You can't really cut against, because if you cut into it, you lose your straight edge, right? So that's why I like the metal ones. Microlux, I believe. You should be able to get them through Micromark, is the ones I have. Outside of that, as far as tools, dental picks, dental tools, I do use those for certain things. There again, you can get them almost anywhere. I've had mine forever. So just some of the tools that I use, I use them all for different things. I've used them on wood kits, plastic kits, my 3D resin kits. You can use them for scribing in, like, maybe your sidewalk outside your structure and you want to put cracks in. They're great for that. I like them because they tend to, instead of using a hobby knife, um, I feel like I have a little more control with them. And there again, you don't need expensive ones. Get cheaper ones. It's for a hobby. They're going to get ruined. They're going to get paint on them, potentially drop. So I guess the way I look at it is use them. If you find you're using it and wearing it out, okay, maybe you do need to buy a little more expensive one. But until you figure that out, why? Um, let's see here. And then the other part of the email, the pitfalls. So we'll go back to kind of what we were talking about at the beginning. The pitfalls, the negatives of the wood kits, I would say, are moisture. You really should prime all sides of every piece, all sides of a wood structure kit. Even so, it's not going to be perfect, and without, depending on what climate you're in, okay, and where your railroad is located and that kind of thing. Wood structure kits tend to be a little more fragile, but they can be affected by temperature and more so moisture more than the others. Plastic kits, whether it be plastic, styrene, acrylic, they're plastic. Compared to a wood kit, you don't get that fine wood grain and stuff like that. And whereas like the wood, where you can really distress the siding if you want to make it look real, you can't really do that with plastic, or you can, but it takes a lot of extra work. That's kind of the downside to the plastic kits. However, personally, I find the wood kits tend to look like, would be more for an older era. Not saying they can't look good on, like, if you're modeling modern era, if you paint them right and build them right, yeah. Um, but generally speaking, too, wooden craftsman kits, most of those are designed after older buildings, older eras, whereas if you're modeling modern day, plastic kits, whether it be plastic, styrene, acrylic manufacturers, they have more modern buildings. So it's about the availability. If you're a wood craftsman guy and you're modeling modern, you're probably going to be doing a lot of scratch building if you don't like plastic kits, or vice versa. If you're a plastic, you don't like wood craftsman kits, but you're modeling an older era. You're probably going to be doing a lot of scratch building, because a lot of the manufacturers of plastic kits nowadays, they don't make a lot of older. Yeah, they might make depots and stuff like that, but while they do have older buildings, that you're still limited. Now, 3D printing, if you know somebody that has a 3D printer or you have one and you can find the building, like, there's a website, it's called Thingiverse. You can go on there and you can get free stuff, download free structures, and you just look up what you're looking for. And there's one particular guy that models on or models does these 3D kits that I really enjoy his structures. You can find um I can find a lot of buildings that I would use on my railroad. There again, availability for what you're modeling, and to be able to print it too. Is your If you do have a printer, is your printer big enough? If not, you're gonna have to find a way to, and that some of those structure kits on that site that people model, they're one piece as far as the walls, the roof and details are separate, but your main building, the walls, some of them are one piece. Well, if your printer's not big enough to be able to print that, you've got to take it into another program to be able to slice it up, and then, to the four walls or whatever, and then print those individually. Some of them, they are already done that way, because they are a bit bigger buildings. So, um, and all this paint and all that stuff, it's the same for the 3D printing as well. Biggest thing is with the 3D printing is make sure before you do any priming, you clean them off, your model off very, very good. Um, I recommend using 91% alcohol and a toothbrush. Have just a little tub of it, dip it in there and brush it off. Wear gloves, and then you can pull it out, let it dry, and then prime it. The reason why I say that is, especially if it's a resin 3D print, and filaments the same way. Um, a lot, while they do make water-based or water washable resin, um, it majority of it isn't. You can't use water, or you can, but it doesn't clean it as well. And I found 91% alcohol is the best. So if you're going to be doing any 3D printing or purchasing 3D printed kits, um, have yourself some 91% alcohol and a cheapo tub with a lid. Dump your alcohol in there, and an old toothbrush, your wife's toothbrush, whose ever toothbrush, use it to clean it off really good. Let it air dry, and once it's all dried, few hours, you should be able to prime it. So, outside of that, looking here, he has here roads and trees with techniques. We don't have a lot of time left. I'll jump into that in another episode, because before we end this episode, I would like to say thank you to Broadway Limited Imports for supporting this podcast. Check them out, www.broadway-limited.com. Also check out our YouTube channel. We're getting close. I think we're like 9 people away from hitting 1,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel, and that is awesome. I want to thank everybody that has gone there, um, and subscribed, and for all the likes and comments and follows on there, and not only for the videos, but also on the audio side over there too, because this is distributed and has been for a little while on YouTube as well. So I want to thank everybody for that. Watching those numbers increase is awesome. And those that have shown some um, support for this podcast, I want to thank you, whether it was through Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon or just straight through PayPal. Thank you. Prime example, Steve, who sent us this email request, with some ideas. He sent us monetary support for our 104th. And Steve, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. It helps out more than you really know. I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I mean, doing this podcast is not cheap. As time goes on, like I said, I wanted the audio quality better, and just, if you go back and listen to the very first one till now, not only is audio better, formats better, all that, it does come with a price, programs and equipment and stuff like that. And I'm actually getting to the point where I'm gonna have to upgrade, I think fairly soon, my microphone. But so far we'll use it until it doesn't want to work anymore. So, and I'll have to go to my backup until I can get something figured out. If you have any questions, reach out to us, modelrailroadtalk@gmail.com. You can always go to our website, www.modelrailroadtalk.com. We have lots over there. We have links over there as well for our podcast, and I'm putting that up every week. I try to a note on that on our website. I'm trying to stay on top of it, I guess is the best way to put it, of getting the link for the latest episode that's out put up on the website. Sometimes it doesn't happen until Monday morning when I get to work and I'm sitting there in the morning waking up, and then I'm like, crap, I got to go and do that. So it's one of those things that I try to do it on Saturdays for everybody. But and then obviously, if you are interested in being a premium supporter, you can head on over to patreon.com/model railroad talk. There's some added benefits over there. And on our YouTube, we now have a way for you to not only subscribe but join over there, supers and membership for low monthly, very, very low. So check that out. Or you can go to Buy Me a Coffee, as we said, buymeacoffee.com/ModelRailroadTalk. They would not let me do Model Railroad Talk. I had to abbreviate it. I don't know why, but we've had some people go through there. Or if you would like to just, send a little support and through PayPal, just reach out to us, modelrailroadtalk@gmail.com, and we can send you a link to that. So love doing these podcasts. The last month or so has been really chaotic between work and stuff outside of work and stuff outside of modeling. And I'm just excited to be back at it. And not that I really took a break, but I'm excited to feel like I'm back at it, right? Enough with this episode. And until the next episode, as we always say, keep your train on the tracks.